Welcome, friends. Today's story takes us deep into the heart of a powerful truth. How one person's courage to stand up can spark a change bigger than anyone imagined. In a small, luxurious car showroom tucked away in a bustling city, a stranger walks in, not as a customer, but as a force ready to challenge the silent culture of contempt that has been allowed to fester for too long. This isn't just a story about cars or business. It's about what happens when someone chooses justice over comfort, kindness over fear, and truth over silence. Whether you've ever felt overlooked, hurt, or powerless, this story will remind you that the strength to change your world often begins with the smallest, quietest actions. So buckle up. Let's take this journey together. It was one of those blazing Texas afternoons, the kind that made even air-conditioned showrooms feel like mirages in the desert. The Sterling Lux Motors dealership stood proud in North Dallas, sleek floors, high ceilings, and cars that whispered wealth. Sales reps circled the space like hawks in suits, eyes peeled for anyone who looked like money. And then he walked in, a man in his late 60s, maybe older. Faded jeans, a wrinkled button-down shirt, and boots coated in dust. His beard was white, trimmed but tired. He moved slowly, like someone who didn't expect to be welcomed anywhere. No one greeted him. No one offered him a water bottle, a brochure, or even a glance. Well, almost no one. In the corner, by the coffee machine, a young intern named Jonas was silently restocking bottled water. He noticed the man right away. Not because he looked important, but because he didn't. Right or no, something about the stranger reminded Jonas of his grandfather, the kind of man who'd built things with his hands and never asked for more than respect. So Jonas walked over and said the 6 words that would change both their lives. "Hey, sir, can I help you?" The man smiled. "Just a little, just looking," he said, "but I appreciate it." A few feet away, a junior sales rep snorted under his breath. "He's not buying anything," he muttered. "Probably just needs a..." Jonas ignored the comment. He stayed with the man, casually asking what kind of car he liked. "Not sure," the man said. "Something strong, reliable, quiet." He paused. "Kind of like people." For the next 20 minutes, they walked the showroom together. The stranger didn't rush. He asked about engine types, safety ratings, even the color options. He didn't flinch at the prices, but he didn't reach for his wallet either. And the rest of the staff, they watched with smirks, whispered jokes. Some even took bets on how long Jonas would entertain the cowboy. But here's the thing, Jonas didn't care. He wasn't trying to impress anyone, he was just being kind, because it was right, not because it might pay off. And that's the moment the story quietly split in two. Because what no one knew, not Jonas, not the sales manager, not the receptionist giggling behind the glass, was that the stranger had visited 5 dealerships that week. And this was the only one where someone looked him in the eye. He wasn't there to buy a car. He was there to buy the truth. You see, this wasn't just a tired old man. This was Malcolm Dorsey, an investor, a builder, and the majority silent owner of the Sterling Lux chain. And what he saw that day would trigger the most dramatic shakeup in the company's history. But for now, he was just a stranger, and Jonas, he had no idea his simple act of decency had just cracked the door open to a future he never dared to imagine. Because in this world, character reveals itself not when the lights are on, but when no one's looking, and someone had been watching. And while Jonas headed back to the break room, thinking it had just been another quiet afternoon, the rest of the staff returned to business as usual, oblivious to the fact that judgment had already begun, because the stranger who walked in, Dusty, was about to turn everything inside out. Behind the polished chrome and espresso machines, Sterling Lux Motors had a different engine running, one powered not by excellence, but by ego. It was a culture built quietly over years, a culture that didn't scream but sneered. Salespeople ranked one another not by kindness or customer care, but by commissions and clothing labels. "He's wearing off-brand loafers. He must be broke. That woman's asking about interest rates. She's not serious." They judged fast, laughed faster, and looked down on anyone who didn't look up to them. Malcolm, still unrecognized, still quiet, had seen enough on his first visit to be alarmed. But the way they treated Jonas, that's what kept him watching. Because Jonas didn't belong here. Not really. People, he didn't gossip in the break room, didn't cut corners to close a deal, and more importantly, he saw people, their dignity, not their dollars. His coworkers saw that as weakness. There was Devin, the top seller, who smiled wide for anyone with a Rolex and rolled his eyes at the rest. There was Claire, who'd memorized more sales scripts than safety specs. And then there was Marcus, the assistant manager, who once told a new hire, if they don't walk in wearing money, don't waste your time. Malcolm remembered that line word for word. It wasn't just arrogance, it was contempt. Contempt for working class customers, contempt for kindness, contempt for the very people they claimed to serve. What they didn't realize was this: contempt is contagious, but so is decency. And while most of the staff infected each other with cynicism, Jonas quietly resisted. A small example, just a few weeks earlier, a young single mom had come in, a baby on her hip, asking about a used SUV. She didn't have great credit. She didn't even have hope in her voice. But Jonas sat with her for nearly an hour, showing her options, explaining what she could qualify for, not once trying to upsell, not once treating her like a burden. She didn't buy that day. But she came back 3 weeks later with her brother. He bought a car, then her cousin, then her boss. Jonas never tracked the ripple, but Malcolm had. That's when he started digging. He pulled employee records, reviewed histories, secret shopper reports. What he found wasn't just disappointing, it was dangerous. Customers who didn't look rich were being shown higher APRs. Some were steered toward cars that didn't suit their needs, just their commission tiers. One client was even charged for a luxury detailing fee that didn't exist. All of it swept under the rug. And every time Malcolm traced a complaint, Jonah's name was never on it. He wasn't perfect, but he was honest, and in a building full of polished lies, that made him stick out like a sore thumb. The twist: Malcolm wasn't there to fire people. He was there to see who would fire themselves through their choices. Because power doesn't just corrupt, sometimes it reveals. This wasn't about one dealership anymore. It was about a system Malcolm had helped build without knowing it had rotted from within. And now he had a decision to make. The next morning before the doors opened, Malcolm made a call, not to the CEO, not to HR, to someone far less expected. Because if you want to test someone's soul, you don't tell them they're being tested. Sometimes change doesn't roar in like thunder. It whispers, and it starts with one small act. Jonas never thought his simple gesture would turn into a revolution, but that's exactly what happened. One rainy afternoon, a man shuffled into Sterling Lux Motors. Not the usual polished crowd, just a tired-looking mechanic named Carlos who needed a reliable truck for work. Jonas noticed him immediately. Carlos didn't carry the flashy confidence or thick wallet the others flaunted, but what he had was something rare: humility and an honest heart. While the others barely glanced Carlos's way, Jonas invited him to sit, listen patiently as Carlos explained how every dollar mattered to him, how his family depended on this truck, how failure wasn't an option. Jonas saw not a number, but a story. He saw someone fighting, just like many viewers listening right now, trying to get through the day despite odds stacked high. Instead of pushing the most expensive model or the dealership's best deal, Jonas worked with Carlos to find what truly fit his needs and budget. No hidden fees, no upsell traps, just honesty. The kind of honesty that can't be bought. What happened next wasn't just a sale. It was a quiet spark. Carlos left with the truck that afternoon, but what he carried with him was more than keys. It was respect, trust, hope. That story traveled faster than Jonas expected. Word spread among the customers, the community, even the staff. Some scoffed at the softness. Others started questioning their own choices. The ripples hit the sales floor harder than the morning coffee. Marcus, the assistant manager, called Jonas into his office the next day. "You're bending the rules," he said coldly. "This isn't how things work here. You either sell fast or you don't sell at all." Jonas' reply, maybe the rules need to change. That moment was a crossroads, not just for Jonas, but for everyone watching silently from the sideline. And here's the twist. Jonas wasn't the only one changing. Devin, the top seller who once laughed at the soft approach, was caught off guard when his own customer demanded to work with Jonas after hearing Carlos's story. Claire, too, found herself questioning the scripts she'd recited so many times, wondering if she'd lost something important along the way. That's the power of one kind act. It breaks down walls. It wakes up the numb. It reminds people that beneath the gloss and grind, we're all just human. Because when kindness echoes in a place built on contempt, it's impossible to ignore. For you listening, maybe you've felt invisible in a system that rewards cruelty, or maybe you've been burned by broken promises. Jonas's story is proof. One honest, kind choice can resonate louder than any cynical shout. And it doesn't take a hero's cape. It takes the courage to be real. As the dealership started to shift, Malcolm watched with a mix of hope and caution. Change was brewing, but the hardest test was yet to come. Because in every story about courage, the true challenge isn't just standing up, it's staying true when the pressure to conform grows strongest. Change often arrives disguised as an invitation. One evening, after a long day filled with whispers and sideways glances, Jonas received an unexpected call. It was from Malcolm, the owner, the man who rarely reached out beyond cold boardroom orders. "Dinner," Malcolm said simply. "Tomorrow night. My place." Jonas hesitated. After all the unspoken battles, the pushback, the tension, thick enough to cut with a knife, why now? Was this a trap, a test, or something more? Curiosity won. At the dinner table, the atmosphere was tense but different. Malcolm wasn't the distant, untouchable figure Jonas had imagined. Instead, he was a man weighed down by years of decisions, regrets hidden behind a veneer of control. As they shared the meal, Malcolm opened up about the pressure to maintain profits at any cost, about watching employees leave one by one, about the loneliness of leadership. Then came the twist. Malcolm confessed he'd been watching Jonas, not just his sales, but the way people responded to him, the respect he earned, the shift in culture that wasn't supposed to happen. "I'm scared," Malcolm admitted quietly. "Scared that if I let go of control, everything falls apart. But I also see maybe it's time to change." Jonas realized this dinner wasn't just an invitation to eat. It was an invitation to understand, to connect, to rewrite the rules. And here's the real lesson for you listening now. Sometimes the biggest breakthroughs come not from loud confrontations, but from quiet moments of vulnerability. When the walls come down, even the hardest hearts can start to heal. As Jonas left that night, the air felt different, lighter, charged with possibility. But change, as we all know, rarely follows a straight path. The next day would bring decisions that could either cement this fragile hope or shatter it entirely. Because when the stakes are high and the past fights for control, the choices we make aren't just about business. They're about who we want to be. In every story of change, there's a moment when the truth, long buried beneath layers of silence, suddenly surfaces, shaking the foundation beneath everyone's feet. For Jonas, that moment came quietly, almost unnoticed, during a routine day at the showroom. A misplaced file, a hurried glance, and suddenly a secret began to unravel. One that Malcolm had kept hidden, not just from Jonas, but from nearly everyone else. It wasn't about numbers or sales. It was something far more personal, something that explained the cold walls, the distant leadership, the fear lurking behind Malcolm's carefully guarded smile. Malcolm had been carrying a heavy burden, a past mistake that cost a trusted employee their job years ago, a wrongful accusation buried deep to protect the company's image, a secret that bred the culture of distrust, contempt, and fear Jonas had been fighting against. When Jonas confronted Malcolm with what he had discovered, the room fell silent, not with anger, but with a shared weight that neither could deny. Malcolm's confession was raw, painful, and yet strangely freeing. He admitted that his silence was a shield, one that protected not only himself, but a flawed system unwilling to face its own cracks. Here lies the powerful lesson. Sometimes the biggest obstacle to change is not outside us, but inside fear of facing our own truth. But here's the twist: the secret's revelation didn't fracture their fragile trust. Instead, it became the catalyst for real transformation. Malcolm, stripped of his armor, started to listen in a way he never had before. Jonas, armed with this new understanding, realized that forgiveness and courage were the only paths forward. Because in the darkest moments, when secrets come to light, we find the chance to rebuild on a foundation of honesty. And just when it seemed the hardest part was over, the real challenge was just beginning. Change isn't a single event, it's a series of moments where we choose to face discomfort, embrace vulnerability, and step boldly into the unknown. When Jonas uncovered Malcolm's secret, the natural response might have been anger or retribution. After all, justice often feels like a demand for punishment, a way to balance the scales. But Jonas chose a different path, one that would surprise everyone, including himself. Instead of wielding the secret as a weapon, Jonas extended an unexpected offer, a chance for redemption, not revenge. It wasn't about condemning Malcolm, but about holding him accountable with empathy and grace. This decision didn't come from naivety. It came from a deep understanding that lasting change rarely grows from bitterness. This moment, this choice, became the turning point for the entire showroom culture. Malcolm, humbled and confronted with his past, didn't resist. Instead, he accepted Jonas's hand, ready to face the consequences of his silence, but eager to help rebuild a workplace where respect and trust could thrive. This act of grace set off a ripple effect. Employees who once felt powerless started to speak up. Walls of contempt began to crumble. As dialogue replaced suspicion, the showroom transformed not overnight, but steadily through daily acts of courage and kindness. The lesson here is profound. Justice is not just about punishment, it's about restoration. True justice listens, understands, and rebuilds. It requires courage to forgive and strength to offer second chances. And yet, just as the light seemed to shine brightest, a final twist emerged. Not everyone was ready for this new path. Old loyalties and fears clung stubbornly, threatening to undo the fragile progress. Jonas realized that justice with grace wasn't a one-time act. It was an ongoing battle, demanding resilience and unwavering hope. Because sometimes the hardest justice is the one we give ourselves. As the showroom braced for the next chapter, one thing was certain: real transformation was no longer just a dream, it was unfolding in real time. The greatest victories often come not from dramatic upheaval, but from quiet, persistent choices that redefine who we are and what we stand for. Change, especially the kind born from grace and justice, rarely stays confined to a single place. What started in that once toxic showroom began to spread quietly at first, like ripples on a still pond. Jonas's decision to forgive Malcolm didn't just heal one broken relationship, it ignited a movement. Employees who had felt voiceless found their courage. The showroom became a space where people listened, not just heard, where respect wasn't demanded, but freely given. But here's the twist: the ripple reached far beyond those walls. Other departments took notice. Other companies within the city began asking questions. What changed here? How did they break the cycle? Word spread that justice could be served without cruelty, that leadership could be both firm and compassionate. And suddenly, what seemed like an isolated incident became a beacon, a blueprint for transformation. However, this rising wave of change revealed an uncomfortable truth. Not everyone welcomed it. Some clung stubbornly to old power plays, fearing loss more than growth. Resistance came in quiet forms: snide comments, veiled threats, even subtle sabotage. The fight for dignity wasn't over. In fact, it had just begun. Jonas realized then that real change isn't a single victory. It's a continuous journey against the tides of fear and prejudice. The ripple effect was a test of resolve for the individuals, the company, and even the community. And here's the most important lesson: small acts of courage can become unstoppable forces. Each person who stands up, who chooses grace over grudges, adds a new ripple to the pond. Sometimes the quietest waves create the biggest changes. As the showroom and its people faced their toughest moments yet, they were no longer alone. A movement had started, one fueled by hope, resilience, and the belief that even in broken places, something beautiful could emerge. Because every ending is just the start of something new, and every ripple holds the promise of a wave. Here's a question that stays with you long after the story ends. What would you do if no one was watching? Jonas found himself wrestling with this very thought in the quiet moments after the storm had passed. The showroom was no longer just a place of work. It was a mirror reflecting the kind of person he wanted to be. But beneath every decision, behind every act of courage or kindness, lay that invisible audience of expectation and judgment. Would he still choose to lead with grace if nobody praised him? Would Malcolm have stepped forward to confess his mistakes if no one demanded accountability? Would the employees continue to lift one another up if no one was applauding? This is where the story flips on its head, a powerful twist that reminds us all true character isn't built for an audience. It's forged in the shadows, in those private battles with fear, anger, and doubt. Imagine a world where kindness is our default, not because it's rewarded, but because it's who we are. Where justice is served not for applause, but because it's right. Jonas's journey taught him that real change begins inside us, quiet, unseen, but unstoppable. And here's the deep truth for anyone listening: you don't need a spotlight to make a difference. Every choice you make when no one is watching shapes the ripples you leave behind. The kindness you show a stranger, the courage to speak up against unfairness, the grace to forgive when you could hate, these are the seeds of transformation. So, what would you do if no one was watching? How would your story change if your greatest acts came from the purest place in your heart, not from the desire for recognition? That's the real legacy, the invisible thread that connects us all, reminding us that the quietest moments hold the most power. As you go forward, remember, you don't need to wait for a grand stage or a crowd. Your actions, no matter how small, matter. They echo farther than you think. And that, my friend, is the kind of story worth living. And so what started as a simple visit turned into a ripple that reached far beyond the showroom walls. Jonas's courage showed us that true justice isn't loud or boastful. It's patient, graceful, and relentless. It teaches us that change begins not with power or position, but with the willingness to do what's right, even when no one is watching. If you take one thing away from this story, let it be this: your voice matters, your actions matter, and the kindness you choose to show can rewrite the story of your life and the lives of those around you. Thank you for listening. Remember, the quiet moments are often where the greatest battles are won and the greatest victories are born. Until next time, keep standing strong, keep choosing grace, and keep being the change.